Okay, so we're live. Welcome back to the Magicminds podcast. I'm Matt Burke, and you're listening or watching to the Liberty's #1 podcast. I can safely say we're the best podcast in Dublin, eh? Brilliant, absolutely fantastic. Have a fantastic show for you today. Today I got an opportunity to interview a gentleman called Oran O'Neill. Oran is a sound engineer in RTE, but he's also blind, but he hasn't always been blind. So I got him on the show to talk to us what it was like going from somebody that could see to being blind, and what's the challenges, and we're calling this interview Going Blind to Be Able to See. So he talks to us about the challenges that he has, not only physically to get around, but also mentally, and the trauma of going blind and adjusting to life with somebody that, as he calls it, being a blindie. You know, the challenges in work, personally and professionally, the challenges around diversity and inclusion. He's now an advocate and an ambassador for inclusion, which was absolutely brilliant, and his knowledge and passion for sound engineering really shone through. But you can see how he's after transitioning now there, or transferring that passion and will and drive for sound engineering now into being an ambassador for inclusion and people with disability. It was an absolutely fantastic show. It really opened my eyes up, and opened my eyes up to the challenges that people face that are blind or are visually impaired, that I've had through COVID, that use tactile touching things and moving around and need sensory need spatial they need space in these times, but it's not there. They don't know where it is, and it really blew my mind, the difficulties that they face. You know, getting on a bus, feeling your way. Is there enough people on it? Is there enough space? You know, people helping you out when you don't want them to help, touching you. It's a minefield for people with disabilities at the moment, is COVID-19. So it was lovely to have him on the show. It was fantastic. He's a friend of mine, Dave Walsh from diversity.ie. So look, let us know what you think of the show. As always, send us in your reviews. Give us some reviews on iTunes. Check out our work on social media, our videos and our vlogs. Get in contact with us if you have anyone that you'd like us to interview. We're always interested in listening or hearing people's stories. You know, that's what we're all about, the Magicminds podcast. Stories that have the power to inspire. As always, mind your little self. Let us know what you think of this interview. Take care. Bye bye. Okay, so we're live. Welcome back to the Magicminds podcast. I'm Matt Buck, and we're the Liberty's #1 podcast. We're so good from the Liberties that we have now a celebrity in from RTE. Oran O'Neill, what's the crack?
What's the crack, Matt? Thanks very much.
I've always wanted to get into RTE. Now RTE's got into us. How does that work out?
Yeah, well, it works out fine. Yeah, you'd like to spend your life in there, would you?
No, I don't know about that. Are you mates with Tuberty and all there?
I wouldn't say mates with Tuberty, but I know him alright. Yeah. Pass him in the corridors every now and again. Yeah. Well, I used to work on the Late Late Show and all.
Did you?
In studios years ago. Yeah, I started in TV sound. So you go through all the programs in studios and outside broadcasts as well. So I would have passed, rub shoulders with
Tubbs.
Celebs, yeah.
Brilliant. Guys, I've asked Oran to come on the show. Oran's a sound engineer in RTE, but he's going to talk to us about life, how going blind has enabled him to see the struggles and difficulties that people have and face with disabilities in their everyday life. And so look, how's life at the moment, the transition, this phase in RTE, how are you getting on with that? How's life for you?
It's kind of a strange one, because I'm loving it, strangely enough. I've been out since March the 11th, I think, working at home. And strangely enough, I think some of my colleagues didn't want to be at home to begin with at all. But as we've progressed and just gone on, it's kind of become a thing, a normal procedure of life. They have changed their minds, and they're now thinking about, well, actually I'd like to stay working sometime at home, maybe 1 or 2 days at home, maybe 1 or 2 days in work. And there are kind of people that I would have known, that I know of years, I've known for years, and I would have said, no, I wouldn't like to work from home, I'd never be able to work from home. But now they're kind of getting into it. I've only found myself and 2 other people so far, 2 of my colleagues who have asked how they're getting on, and they've said they love being at home. So I'm the third. So I have to find a few more colleagues who like being at home. But in general, I mean, I think it's working out okay. At the moment, we just have what you term essential staff in RT at the moment on the campus. Those who are working on live programming or radio or TV, but most admin people would be working from home at least some of the time. Some kind of come in maybe for a day or so if they kind of getting a bit bored of work at home. But in general, we're kind of still staying at home. We're kind of being advised to stay at home as long as we can. Brilliant. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's I don't miss it because you know, I think one of the things about people is the my colleagues is the interaction, is the physical interaction they miss. And because I'm kind of a bit of a technophobe, I like the whole Zoom and Teams meeting and all that kind of stuff. So I don't mind talking to somebody on a phone or on Zoom and I get the same kind of feedback or that I feel I was getting prior to, you know, the kind of the human element. But I can understand why people are getting a little bit bored and a little bit cocooned in, I suppose. But we're okay. I mean, I've got Larry to look after, and he's loving it now.
I forgot to mention, guys. We have Larry here. Larry is Oran's blind a guide dog.
He's my guide dog, yeah.
So he's lying on the floor here.
He's
not related to Larry Gogan.
No, he's not related to Larry Gogan. No, I was informed that Larry didn't. Larry in the book, if you remember, the snapper, the dog's name was Larry Gogan, and I've been informed that Larry didn't like that the dog was called Larry Gogan.
That's a privilege.
Yeah, I would have thought so too.
So you never got a picture with him and Larry, did you?
No, we didn't actually, because we were talking about it, but it just didn't work out. But Larry, you know, at least there's one Larry still in RT who's the main fella now. He's become known as the therapy dog.
Has he?
Yeah, people come into my office and they might be having a bad day or something, and they say, "Can I come in for a minute?" And some of them know, some of them I wouldn't know. I know them vaguely, and I'd say, "Yeah, come in," and they'd say, "Oh, that's great. I just want a few minutes with Larry." so 10 minutes with Larry, and they're laughing and they're away again. So because he's a lovable fella and he loves meeting people, and yeah, he likes people coming to see him.
He likes a bit of attention, like myself.
He's my first dog, so
is he?
Yeah, he's my first dog. I got him. I'll have him 2 years in November, and I didn't want him. I was afraid of dogs when I was younger. I'd had experiences with dogs chasing me and biting me and what have you. So I put myself on the list for Larry, and I didn't really actually expect it would happen, or I thought I'd be able to just say no at the end of the day. Right. And I still could have, but I met Larry, and there was about 2.5 years of waiting to get Larry, and when I met him, Larry just walked around our house into the kitchen and walked around, and he just sat on my feet, and that was it.
Fantastic!
Kind of,
Beautiful story. Can you tell, before we get into the impact of your disability and the blindness within COVID, the COVID-19 and that difficulty, can you talk to us a little bit about life before that, because you weren't always blind, that just developed, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've had what I would term, I've always had very bad vision.
Okay.
Since I was really a baby, and I was wearing glasses from about 2 or 3 years old, from what I can remember. So I always had bad vision, and I was always I suppose what springs in my throughout my childhood more than anything is getting slagged and mocked and picked on because you're specky four eyes. That was kind of the term, and that I suppose that it got to me a good bit during my childhood, and I think I was kind of fairly introverted because of it. But through we went on. I was still able to play football and meet my mates and play, but I always had to be very careful of because I always had very thick, heavy glasses, and they were made of glass in those days. Yeah. So a few times, you'd break them, and when you break them, then you wouldn't be able to see it, and you wouldn't be able to. You had to wait until somebody came by and maybe help you get home or something.
Right. How limited was your vision? What percentage are we talking?
It was quite. So I probably had peripheral vision up to about maybe there. Long sightedness, I was very short sighted. So things far away I couldn't see at all. And if I was actually just remembering this last night. Before last night, knowing that I was coming to you, I remember being bet on the head by a teacher of mine in school because I had my face in a book, in a copybook that I was trying to read,
Right.
and as I didn't know I was kind of in my own little world, and he was walking around the class. I didn't really realize where he was, and the next thing is kind of this clatter on the head. Because he said, don't have your head so far down on the, you can see perfectly well. But actually I couldn't. I needed to be that far down, even with my glasses on. It was just something that I just kind of began to realize that people, they don't necessarily understand. There are different types of visual impairment. It's not always about being, it's not about being things going dark.
Yeah.
And that's called blindness. Blindness can be in many different forms. But I do remember that, and kind of, again, it kind of bringing home the idea that you're not really the same as everybody else, and you're kind of, you're a little bit maybe odd, or sometimes can be seen as a bit stupid or a bit dim.
100%.
And then when I got older, into my 20s, I noticed that I was having terrible problems with light, and I used to wear baseball caps,
Right.
just for the peak to kind of help absorb the sunlight. And I used to do stupid things like I'd be driving into work, and if I was driving into the sun, let's say a winter's morning, when the sun's very low in the morning, and that I'd be blinded by it. So what I would do is I'd get up early, and I would drive into work just before the sun came up, just when there was a bit of light, so it couldn't be dark, so I couldn't really drive at night, but I kind of still was. And I'd get up maybe, let's say, half an hour before, just the sunrise was hitting, and I'd get into work just before the sun would come up. And I used to remember, I wasn't too far from work at that stage, so I'd leave at about 7:30, and I'd be in by 8 o'clock at the latest, and I wouldn't actually be scheduled on to work until 10 o'clock in the morning. So it was just to beat that kind of. It was my way of adapting to and kind of keeping things under wraps and not letting anybody know that I had a problem with my vision. But then I started bumping into things in work, and people began to notice, and so I went for some tests, and it took about 9 years to actually suss out what was wrong. And I had many deteriorating eye conditions, and eventually was told in 2009 that I was on the way to going blind, and within 10 years I would be, which is fairly on the money. So I had to kind of adapt to that. But as I was going through life, and especially into my early 20s, I kind of knew that there was something seriously wrong with my sight, and I kind of knew in my own head I was going blind. But I went to a lot of consultants who were. A few of them were said, it's all in your head.
No.
You're not going blind. Yeah.
What?
You're just all in your head. There's nothing wrong with your sight. You don't have great sight, but there's nothing there to indicate that you are going blind.
But there was an inner voice, and there was a
knowing. Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
something up here.
Yeah, there was. I mean, I knew it was getting worse and worse, and I knew I was kind of just bumping into stuff that I mightn't have done 6 months ago.
Okay. You could feel the increase in it. It was slowly changing.
Yeah. And one of the things I do when it kind of deteriorates, one thing that happens to me is I lose my balance, particularly on the right hand side if there's a kind of a bleed. So I noticed that every 6 months or so I'd be veering into the wall on the right hand side. Because
you've lost your perception.
Yeah, because
visual perception.
Something's gone wrong there. Yeah, so. And you'd be listening to, you go into a consultant and say, there's nothing wrong with, it's all in your head.
That must be frustrating.
Very frustrating, yeah.
Scary, frustrating.
Yeah, really kind of, it's funny about, I don't want to do consultants or a disservice, but it's funny when you think, when a patient thinks or knows that there's something wrong and it's being dismissed, but a doctor won't listen to what's being said. And I remember going in 2009 to a particular consultant, and in 10 minutes he said, "Oh yeah, you're going blind."
This is unbelievably crazy, Oran, right? There's a young lady just sat in that seat before you, said the same thing. She was telling these doctors and consultants that there's something wrong with her, and they were like, no, we and they didn't know what to do with her, and then eventually found a consultant that would help her see the problem. It's unreal.
It's not, and it's not.
And she knew.
She knew. Yeah. Like there's a friend of mine. His son had something else, and again he knew there was something wrong with him, and his doctor said, "No, it's all in your head. It's all in your head." And eventually this guy, lad, fair play to him, said, "Would you ever go and do your job? Because I know there's something wrong." And there was, and he was right. So it's just, I think you've got to, to a certain extent, you got to trust your own feelings and senses and know what's going on in your own body. And to me, I knew this was going to be the end result. It was just a matter of, it was kind of elating to, if that's the correct term, to kind of be told to kind of what's the word I'm looking for, to be eventually kind of told, yes, what you're thinking is right.
Verified.
To verify. Thanks very much. Yeah, to be verified, and it's kind of, I kind of went out of the room at that visit with that consultant. And my mother was with me at the time, but I kind of went out of the room going, well, thank God somebody's actually recognised that this is happening to me. And it wasn't so much, I mean, the next few months and that were an ordeal, the next few years, but at the same time there was a kind of a thinking in my head of, well, at least I'm not going mad.
There's a double-edged sword there, wasn't it? It's like, I'm grand that we're on the same page, but I have to now deal with this. That must have been scary. And
well, yeah, it was. I mean, I kind of embraced it, and I didn't embrace it. The first thing I was advised to do was contact the NCBI, the National Council for the Blind of Ireland, and I did that fairly straight away.
They have a great service, actually.
Very good service. Yeah,
I deal with them.
Yeah, brilliant. And they got, initially we looked at some magnifiers, and I used to have a little telescope thing that I could look through and look out with with the good eye, what I call the good eye, and see certain things. But it seemed to be funny once it kind of started. Once it was kind of known, or we put out there that I was losing my sight, I lost my sight a lot quicker than I thought I was. Suddenly you think, oh, I can't see that anymore. Or maybe I couldn't see it yesterday, but maybe I thought I could see it. But the realization of what you can see, and it kind of hits you. But the adoption of it, I was, in a way, as I say, I was kind of prepared for it all my life. I knew there was something wrong, as I said, so it was just a matter of embracing, as best I could, embracing it. But you have pitfalls, there are, a few months later, after I got diagnosed in May of 2009, and it took me until September to actually say, well, what I'll do actually is I need to start having a cane, because I'm bumping into things. And what I used to do was kind of map out in my head visually where I needed to go, and always take a particular route. But the problem was, if there was anything in my way, like a bin or even a desk or a table or anything, particularly in work, that would throw me, because suddenly the corridor I was walking down was clear, all on the right hand side, on the left hand side. Now there's something there, what's there, and that threw me. Now do I have to remember? And
am I in a different room? Actually, did I take the wrong turn?
That has happened.
Yeah. I've worked with guys that has happened. Then.
Yeah, I found it early, at a very early stage, that I begin to. I don't know if it is if I think we as humans move a lot when we're talking to people in a kind of a standing situation. So you're sitting on a corridor, or you're on the street, and you might be talking to somebody, and you invariably you start turning, just unbeknownst to you, and then you end your conversation, you go off. And what used to happen to me was I'd be talking to somebody in work and in the corridor, and I didn't let on to them what was going on. So I used to wait for them to say, hello, Oran, and I had to quickly go, who's that now? Well, that's Matt. How are you, Matt? And if I didn't get it right, there was a problem because what was being thought was Oran's he's very grumpy these days. He's not in good form.
Oh,
He won't say hello to me, and it was just that I was trying to register
okay.
who the person was. But when I eventually, if I was talking to you and we'd be standing up and we'd be doing this little dance, and you'd go off, said, "All right, see you again." I'd go off, and then I'd start walking the way I was walking originally, and the next thing I go bang into a wall because I wouldn't have realised we'd actually turned, and it was just one of those things of the senses. You can't see that anymore. You can't actually physically see.
Yeah.
Well, maybe there was a door to your left, and now you've turned over 90 degrees. And that door is now a wall. But you can see it's a wall, but I can't. So I would just go, I was going that direction. So you kind of have to. I have to be wary of that, and that's where I decided to use the cane, because I was bumping into stuff, and then that took me a good while to kind of come to terms with, particularly in work, because to be actually people, as I say, people were wondering. I didn't know this, but people were kind of wondering, was I okay? Some people thought I was dying. Some people thought I had cancer, and I wasn't talking to them. And eventually, I just decided, right, I have to bring the cane in,
Right.
Because the previous day, what happened was I was going over to the canteen to have a cup of coffee with my colleagues, and there was a door that opened, and I was listening to their footsteps, and somebody said hello to me off in the distance, and I kind of turned and said hello, and I lost my way, and the next thing is I banged straight into the glass wall of the outside of the canteen, and there were loads of people that were just sitting at a table just on the other side of the window that knew me, and they said nothing, but they went up to, in the next couple of days, I went up to my colleagues and said, what's wrong with Oran there? What happened there? And eventually they said, well, I think he's. They actually didn't say. They were good enough. They didn't. They said, we want to talk to Oran. So they said, look, there's too many questions being asked. So I said, okay, look, I'm going to bring in the cane, and that'll be it.
Why was the reluctance there? Were you finding it hard to accept, or was there?
Yeah, I think in my own head, because as we kind of started the conversation about when I was younger and wearing glasses and having very bad sight, I think there was always this perception of not wanting to be, from my end, not wanting to be different. So if I now had this white thing in front of me and I was using it, arcing it left to right, I didn't want people to then go, oh, there's Oran, he's now blind. Now I have to treat him differently.
Okay.
Because it's funny, I was listening to somebody talk about this yesterday, a topic of conversation about the word blind and it being associated with being the word stupid, and how you could substitute blind and stupid and not know the difference. So you might see somebody might say you'd have to be blind not to see that. You heard of that expression?
Yeah, absolutely.
There are some people now. It was an interesting conversation. It was a podcast I was listening to where people were kind of taking offence to this, because you could substitute that. You might as well just say you'd have to be stupid not to see that.
Wow.
Now, is it blind or is it stupid? And is blind and stupid the same thing? So it just kind of opened up a little bit of a conversation yesterday with a group of people listening to this radio show, and it's kind of something that it was of interest to me, because I consider myself blind, but I don't actually say I'm blind. I say I'm a blindy, and blindy usually gets a bit of a grin or gets a bit of a laugh, because it's more jovial, I think.
Is that you owning it more so?
Maybe it is, yeah. I
Is that like, I'm going to wear this the way I like it, and this is going to suit me?
Yeah, it might do. I don't have an issue really with saying. See, there is a bit of a debate of whether calling yourself vision impaired, visually impaired, partially sighted, or blind. What's the right term?
Okay.
And there are those people who would argue that vision impaired actually has nothing to do with your eyes, but has to do with what's in your head, and it's ignorance of knowledge. You don't have the vision to see, what's in front of you. not what you can see in front of you. But there, what seems to be kind of generally accepted is vision impaired or visually impaired or blind.
Right.
And in some cases it's low vision. So low vision people with low vision, anybody could be considered to be of low vision if you've got 200 over 250,000 people, I think, that have a vision impairment in Ireland, but they're not all blind. Right. So vision impairment, it counts as if you're wearing a pair of glasses. Yeah. You're visually impaired. But those people don't necessarily like being called visually impaired because they're not. They don't see themselves as visually impaired. So they say, well, I'm not blind. I might just have low vision.
Oh, right.
Now, low vision, as far as I would be concerned, the people I would know would be people who would have low vision would be people who could see things around them, who might be able to make out some detail, who would be able to see what's on the computer screen in front of them if they were to use a magnifying glass on paper or a digital magnifier on their computer screen. That's what I consider to be, those people would be considered to be low vision in my mind. I can't see any of that, so I don't really have an issue with calling myself blind. But I think you're right in saying maybe it's about owning it, because there is this kind of, I think there is this kind of view in my head certainly, and I have kind of experienced where if you say you're blind, it means there's something more. You can't just be, that can't just relate to your vision. It must relate to from a sighted person, let's say. And I'm not saying everybody. I just think some people think, well, okay, you can see, and also maybe you're not playing, as my mother would say, you're not playing with the full deck. Okay. And that's not the case at all. Oh, yeah. So, and I just, like, I've introduced myself as, hello, I'm Oran and I'm a blindie. But at the same time, I don't have really a problem saying I'm Oran and I'm blind. Because that's what I am. Yeah. That's it. I'm registered blind, and I suppose I've come to, in the last 10 years, I've had to come to terms with it. But maybe there is a little bit, of that, of what I was picking up and learning and evolving through in my youth, and knowing, well, you're going to be picked on because you've glasses. You're always going to be the last guy picked on the football team, because. Not because you can't necessarily play football, because you can't really see that well. You've got those big thick glasses, so you're kind of out of the box. You don't fit in. But again, none of us really fit in.
There's no box to fit us all in. There's no perfect. There's no normal. There's just you are you.
You are you, and that's it. Yeah.
Just labels.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm thinking? This is strict my mind. What was the greatest challenge going into work as you being a sound engineer? How did you handle that transformation? Like, I mean, I can't get my mind around the equipment that you had to use, the software, the technology. How did you transition into that piece? Or was that just gradual the way you said it? Or?
Well, it was gradual. It was to be honest, it was difficult because I was hiding this for years. So really from around 2000, I was hiding the fact that I was going blind, and I knew I was going blind. I hadn't been diagnosed, but I knew my sight was getting worse. And I left the studio-based sound in 2000, and I went into an area called post-production sound. So I was mixing programs like Fair City or Primetime or Would You Believe or any Irish language program, or any of the promos that you would see going on, promoing in there for programs during the commercial break or any kind of sports stuff. And the problem with that was I was using a system called Pro Tools. Well, initially it was a different system called AMS Neve Audiophile, and we bought audio. We went from Audiophile to Pro Tools. And when we went to Pro Tools, the problem was it was all screen based, and everything it was all visual, and that's when I started to notice that I was taking longer to do a job. And actually, it turns out I actually wasn't taking longer to do a job, but it felt that way in my head, because now I couldn't see the audio waveforms on the screen so well. I'd have to kind of guess, and I was never able to find the mouse pointer. So I would always, when I finished doing something on a computer, I would push the mouse back up to the top left in the hopes that the pointer would always be on the top left of the screen. Well, it didn't always work out because sometimes I'd forget it, and somebody might be in my room and I'd be listening to something, I might be looking at my screen, and I'm sure they were wondering, why is he moving the screen or why the mouse around all the time? And it was because I was trying to find the mouse, trying to find the cursor to make an audio edit or something. So what I started to do was learn as quickly as I could, or adapt to the keyboard itself, and how many keyboard shortcuts could I use to do my day-to-day job. So that was a huge learning curve, because the Pro Tools system is great, and digital audio workstations are great, partially because they're all they're based visually. So if you can see a waveform on a screen, you can manipulate it very easily if you've got good sight. Whereas I didn't, so I was now trying to make something work audibly that didn't really work. That was more a visual application. So I kind of had to find my own way and adapt. And during all this time, you got to remember, I was trying to keep everybody happy in my own head. I didn't want, you still have the same amount of hours to do a particular program. The voiceover still has to be recorded. You have to prep the audio, you have to mix the audio, and then you have to do a playback with your producer, and that all has to be done within a certain amount of time. So I couldn't really say, oh, listen to the producer, listen, I'm losing my sight, so I'm going to take longer. This is going to take longer, because the fear was they would go off to my line manager and say, hang on a second, why am I getting a substandard audio guy who really can't see what's going on in front of him?
That's interesting. You say a substandard audio guy.
Yeah, that's what I would. That's what
You
I
are
thought
beyond, like, you are obviously high tech, you're really professional, qualified, but the fact that blindness now makes you substandard, that irks me.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was the way I saw it.
Yeah.
It's just the way I saw it. I can't
understand that.
I'm given 100%. If I was given 100% yesterday, I have to give it 100% tomorrow. And as it kind of turned out, when we began to tell people, and I remember one funny scenario. What I used to do, actually, just is I slowly began to tell my colleagues, and one guy in particular who I used to work with all the time, and he used to work next door, and what I used to do is I might be working on a little package and a little graphic. There might be a little graphic coming out, like maybe some text or something of the image would change, and it was something that the graphics guy would have put in, and the producer might say to me, can you put in some sound there, a little whoosh or something? Can you make up something that that will define that bit of graphic? And then there's another one there, another one there, another one there, and I'd go, yeah, sure, no problem, not being able to see where those graphics were. So what I used to do was I'd mix the whole program. I'd do whatever as far as I could go, and I'd pick out my sound effects that I wanted to put in, and I'd put them in roughly within the what's called the timeline, and then I'd go into my mate, my colleague next door, and I'd say, John, would you come in here for a second? And I'd say, is that? And I'd say, would you just have a look at this? And I said, there's a graphic here somewhere. I said, does that sound effect look like it's in sync with the graphic? And he'd say, no, maybe it's a couple of seconds or a second out or whatever. And so I said, okay, grand. I'd move it. And what about the next one? And then that was all fine, and it was grand. But then things got serious, because we had what's called sync issues with the audio and the video. And there was a particular program that was coming in that I was working on every week, and the audio was out of sync with the video, and I couldn't see it on picture. So again, I had to go into my mate and say, Sean, would you come in and have a look? And I'd say, is it look in sync? And he'd be saying, no, I don't think it's in sync. And I'd move it a couple of frames or whatever. And I said, does it look in sync? And he's, oh yeah, I think it's in sync. And I could feel in his, although I couldn't see him,
in his tone,
I knew in his tone he was wondering what was going on here. So eventually, around that time, I just said, look, this is what's going on.
He was just with us, was he your confidant?
Sean was my confidant, yeah. Yeah, and he took it in his stride, and we just said, right, what are we going to do? So I said, for now, this is all we're going to do. If this happens, I know things are going to get worse, but I might need to call on you during the day to help me out. And he said, yeah, that's no problem.
Brilliant.
But then people would hand me scripts, or people would hand me, and there'd be different things. The producers would come in, and sometimes, you might be working with Sean, he wouldn't be on that day, and your producer would be saying, I think that looks out of sync, and you'd be going, yeah, no, it looks okay to me. And God, I don't know. But really what I was saying was, if you would just leave the room for 2 minutes, I could go and get somebody, a confidant, get them to look at it, and then you can come back and I can say, no, that's not right, or it's right, or whatever, So I was trying little avenues all the time, and trying not to tell people, and then eventually I had to. People were asking too many questions to, as I say, my mates around, and I remember one of the funniest things. I was working with we do a lot of, as I say, we do a lot of promos. I was mixing a lot of the promos that you see during commercials on RT1 or RT2, and there's a big gang of directors there, and they're all lovely, but they're all noticing something, and they were saying to my mates, and what are you doing? What's going on with him? He doesn't seem happy. He doesn't, is there something wrong with him? And Sean was saying, no, I don't know. You'd have to talk to him. So eventually, I asked their boss to come down, and we had a chat about what was going on. He said, I'm sorry to hear that, and that his mother was going through something similar. He lives in the UK. She lives in the UK, and I said, okay, we can tell people, you can tell people in the department, to the producers, and I said, I don't really want anybody else to know, just at the moment. So that was grand. So he said, tell me what we can do for you, and I said, okay, I'll think of things. So what he did was he brought all these producers into his office, and his office was quite small. So he brought about 12 people into his office, and he said, Oran's going blind, and he doesn't want anybody to know about it, and you're not to tell anybody. And they all went, okay, and whatever, and they left the office. And then about a week later, I was working with these people, and they were coming in, and how are you? Grand, yeah, and they're doing my job, and grand, I had to go out, and then somebody else come in, the following week, and I went to Sean, my mate, and I said, have you been talking to promos yet? Have they been talking? Oh yeah. So they know about you. Yeah, all right, okay, grand. I said, they haven't said anything to me. Oh yeah, that's because you told their boss not to tell, and that they weren't to tell anybody, and they thought that meant you as well, that you weren't supposed to know that they knew. So this is the whole point of it, to let it out with this small group. So then they started coming down and going, it was really quite good, because they come down into the room, we do the job, and let's say they print out maybe some script in a larger font, and I was doing well with that. I was still able to do the job, and they'd say to me, oh, by the way, there's a desk outside, and I'm going to get moved. Larry, you want to speak to you? But they kind of, in their own small way, started to realise what was going on and what needed to be done, and looked out for me, which is great, because they go to different locations, and they say, they'd ring up and say, if you're going to Canteen, or you're going over to our office or whatever, just be aware that there's a bin on the right hand side of the corridor about 10 feet up, where you'd be turning right into our office or whatever. And that was fantastic. And then then I decided, right, I'll start telling more and more people. But as I was telling more and more people, what was happening was my site was getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And eventually I just had to say, I was the one who made the call and said, look, I can't do this anymore, because I could do all the audio work itself, but if it was all audio and I didn't have to look at a screen, and in particular, I was looking at a TV and going, I can't tell if that program, the audio and the video, are in sync or not. And I said to myself, I can't allow myself to do that, and to let a producer walk out of my dubbing suite and go, I'm happy with that. He knows what he's doing, if I'm not too confident. So I had to give it up, which was the biggest wrench in my life, because I love sound, and yeah, what we were going to do next was the big thing, and it took a while to find an avenue. I'm not saying we haven't found it completely yet, because there is still a little bit of a feeling, I think, of back to that kind of, well, he's blind, so okay. There was this kind of this view, and to a certain extent there can be still, or is still, but certainly at the beginning, well, he's blind, we give him an office and leave him in the office, and let him work on the computer. And what I was doing was making out the rosters for my guys at that time, which I still am doing. But the view was, well, he is blind, so he can't be, we can't have him walking around corridors, we can't be asking him to meetings to take part in some, because he is blind, and he would find that very difficult to get from A to B. So he would be better if we would be better to make sure he stays where he is.
That's not their choice.
Which isn't their choice, and that's kind of the struggle that I think we, not only myself but blind people in the blind community, are finding every day of their lives is trying to explain to people that just because you've lost your sight, and it doesn't mean your brain stops functioning.
Yeah. Was I just seeing a wash over your face there as you talk about letting that piece go? Was that difficult, that piece to let go? I could see the disappointment in your face as you said that, that transition, because it's clear to me sitting here beside you that sound is something that you love dearly.
Love it, yeah. Yeah, it was a huge wrench, because it literally kind of became one day where I had to go to my boss and say, let's say on a Friday or whatever, look, I can't do it anymore. And then on Monday, I had to find guys that freelance guys that I knew anyway, to come in and do my work for me, and then we had to eventually get somebody in.
Wow.
Permanently to kind of to take my position. And during all that, I'm kind of thinking, I wonder, is there any other way I could?
How can I get in there?
Yeah. And even if there's anything I could just help the guys, even if I wasn't working all the time, could I help them even edit the sound? So anything I could do, and the technology at that time just didn't exist.
Okay.
It's getting better. There's a little program I'm beginning to use at the moment called Reaper. And Reaper, and it's a very popular little program, an audio program. And one of the great things about it is there's a Reapers group, and there are several guys that have made scripts to make that application accessible for the blind. So
Brilliant.
I can use it with my screen reader, which I use all the time on my computer. It's called JAWS, and they wrote some scripts to be able to use that application with the JAWS screen reader, and that's just like somebody really thinking outside the box. Actually, do you know what? Because you would be reading as this was all going on. You'd go onto the internet and read, guys talking about same kind of struggles. I mean, I talked to a guy who was working on one of the golf tours, on the European Golf Tour, and he was doing sound for the golf. And again, he was the same thing. He was trying to hide it a little bit, and he had a little 9-inch monitor that he used to bring up to as close to his eyes as he possibly could, so that when the camera shot changed to a different hole, to a different player, he knew which mic on his audio decks to push up, because he was looking so closely at this little monitor, and he'd know the shot has changed, and he'd hear the commentator, and he'd be able to change the mics very quickly. For that, but again, he was trying to hide it again, kind of, because there was nothing accessible for him. But he wanted to do his job, and he loved his job, same as I did. But look, these things, I suppose I say it is a lot. These things happen, and you have to move on. That it's hard to move on.
Of course,
it's very difficult. But you kind of, the more, I think, the more you get involved, the more you get out there, and the more you say, look, I'm visually impaired. And just say it, and or blind, or whatever you want to say, whatever you're comfortable with. If that makes you, a little less vulnerable, I think that's good. And forget about, like, when I started using the cane, and what would happen was I wanted my independence, but yet I didn't want to look like a fool, and I used to take a lot of help from people. People would say, will I bring you, where are you going? And I'd say, I'm going that way. And I knew sometimes they weren't going my way, but they would, give me their elbow, and I'd walk on with them, and we'd have the chats. And I wasn't really comfortable with it. And then I started saying to people, somebody would say, do you need a hand going? And I'd say, no thanks, I'm fine, I know where I'm going. And there was this kind of tone, this kind of audible tone from people And a couple of times I got approached like this. Somebody would say, "Do you want to help? Where are you going?" Somebody would say, "Where are you going?" And I'd say, "Well, why do you want to know where I'm going? Because I don't know yet." Well, I want to help you. Okay, well, thanks very much, but I'm okay. I know where I'm going. And they'd say, "Well, why don't you need help? Why won't you take my help?" And I said, "Well, you're kind to offer, but I actually know this route quite well, so I don't need it." And they say, "Well, there's no need to be like that.
Jesus Christ.
All I'm doing is offering you some help."
Why don't you feck off?
Well, yeah, that used to go through my head, but I was talking to a friend of mine about this some years later, and he was saying it's kind of that feel-good factor that you feel if you've helped somebody out, whoever it might be, in your head there's that kind of, I've done my good deed for the day. So today I helped a blind guy cross the road.
Yeah.
Or today I got a blind guy a cup of coffee, or the other day I helped somebody in a wheelchair, get up a ramp, or there is that kind of, I've done my good deed for the day.
Yeah.
And if you take that away from somebody, they don't necessarily tend to like it.
But my thing about it as well is you're invading someone's privacy. You ask if you want help. They don't want help. Maybe I've just a luxury because I work in disabilities. I understand it. You can offer if somebody's help. If you don't need it, then that's okay.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny because you kind of become more, as I say, you want to become be as independent as you possibly can be, and you do have to take help sometimes. And there are friends of mine who are visually impaired and wouldn't take help at any stretch of the imagination, because that's the way they want to be, is independent, and that's fine. But I think at the same time, if somebody does say to you, if you encounter somebody who is visually impaired or somebody who has any kind of disability and doesn't really want the help that you're offering, people shouldn't be getting in a snot about it and going, "Oh, well, who do you think you are?" It's just that we're comfortable in our own skin, knowing where we are, where we're going. And believe me, I've had plenty of occasion where I have known exactly where I am, and something has happened, and I've had to call for help pretty well immediately. I'll tell you a very quick example. I was walking home. I was on the way out of work one night, very late at night, and Larry got lost. Larry just lost his. He just wasn't paying attention, and we ended up in some bushes. And I said, "This doesn't seem right."
What's Larry up to?
What's Larry? And I was saying to Larry, "Come on, Larry, find a way." And we were just walking in circles. And I was panicking, and I was, where the hell am I? I know where I'm going. I know where I want to get to, but where am I? And it was pretty quickly that I decided, a few years ago, I would have said, what I'm going to do here is risk everything, keep on walking, and eventually I'll find where I am, with luck. But actually what I decided to do was I rang a couple of the security guys in work, and I said, "Look, I've no idea where I am." And immediately, it was like a posse went out, and there were guys running all over the campus trying to look for me. And I had no real shame in saying to them, "I'm lost. I need help here."
Right.
So I think when somebody does need help, give them the help. But when they don't actually need it, it's fine to say, it's fine for us to say no. And accept it.
Here's a question for you.
Have I won the car yet?
What? What's your thoughts around inclusion, diversity, and Ireland in 2020? Where are we with all that? I don't think we're too far along the way as much we talk about. What's your thoughts around it? After going from able-sighted to now being a blindie.
To being a blindie, yeah. I think, this is something that's quite close to my heart, because I've been kind of dabbling in diversity and inclusion for the last few years, and I don't think we're where we need to be at all. I think something that's kind of funny. A friend of mine coined this phrase, and I don't dislike it. He kind of said to me one day, "You had to go blind to see,"
Is he a mutual friend of ours?
He'd be a mutual friend of ours, yes.
Mr. David Walsh.
Mr. David Walsh, yeah.
He was on the show.
Yeah. Why'd you let him on?
Yeah. Look, I have to give everyone a chance. I mean, I brought you on because you're handsome, right?
Everybody needs their 15 minutes of fame.
Yeah.
No, Dave had I had a long conversation with Dave several years ago, and I actually just rang Dave to talk about, diversity and inclusion and a course in diversity and inclusion. And I don't know, about an hour later we were still on the phone and he was drilling me with questions and I felt like it was on question time or something and I wasn't getting the questions right. We had a most amazing conversation and it really opened my eyes. And the peculiar thing that Dave actually made me realise, it was something that I was doing subconsciously. And it was something that I was doing subconsciously, I realised throughout my life because of my vision impairment, was that when I'd be talking to somebody that I didn't know at all, I wouldn't necessarily judge that person. I wouldn't have any thought about, is that person black? Are they Chinese? Are they tall? Are they dark haired? Do they have glasses? I actually didn't care. I was just interested in what they were saying to me. And Dave and I were just talking about this kind of assumption that if you can see somebody, there's this prejudice that we all have.
It's unbiased.
It's there. It's unbiased.
It's an unconscious prejudice.
Yeah, and it's there. And I was saying, I was talking to Dave, but I was saying, but actually I don't, because we've been talking about a girl that was on the radio. I was actually talking to Tuberty on his show, and she was explaining about being in the theatre with her boyfriend. This was years ago, and they went out at half time, as I like to call it, or the interval, before Act 2, whatever. They went outside. I think her husband smoked or she smoked, and she wanted a breath of fresh air anyway. And this woman came along. They're outside the theatre on the alleyway side, and they got talking to this woman. And they were chatting about, where are you, we're in the theatre, what are you seeing, what's it like? Oh, the play is very good, like it a lot. And they were just having a very casual conversation, and it was just three people having a conversation. And they said, her boyfriend said, listen, we better go back, so the half time is over. And so they started walking back. So they said, I'd love you to meet you. And her boyfriend just said, just hang on there for a second. And he ran off, and then he came back a minute later, and she said, what happened? And he said, nothing, I just wanted to give that woman some money. She was homeless. And it was kind of, the point she was trying to get across to the listeners and to Brian was, it's the same way that I feel. Like, I have no idea what you look like. I honestly don't care what you look like. And I don't really care what your background is. It's the conversation we're having now. And she was saying, there she was coming out of the building, out of the theatre to get a breath of fresh air. Somebody comes along the road and they just start talking. And they're having a pleasant conversation, but there's no, if she was trying to make a point, if she had sight, maybe she would have went, oh, there's a homeless person, I'm not talking to them. Let them go. But because you've no sight, it's almost like you'll talk to the wall. So the discrimination can kind of goes away because you're more interested in listening to what somebody has to say rather than saying, where are you from?
You're judgments in our
you're
mind.
from the Liberties. I'm not going to talk to you from I don't talk to somebody from the Liberties. But actually, when I lost my sight, I suppose, as Dave coins our phrase, I had to go blind to see. You kind of it's not that I just realised that I was kind of doing this anyway, that I mightn't be able to make out somebody's face, but and that was kind of okay, because I was more interested in what was their story, what are they bringing to the table, rather than saying, well, like there's somebody here recently, I'm going back a couple of years, but I know somebody who lived in the inner city, was brought up in the inner city, and works where I work, and this subject was being broached with diversity and inclusion, and they happened to tell somebody on the committee, one of the original committees, that they've never told anybody in my place of work that they were brought up in the inner city. because of the stigma attached to that.
Mm.
And I couldn't believe that.
Yeah, I know.
So that's
I'd
like,
experienced that.
why would you deny somebody a voice, just because of where they are, or who they are, or the fact that even, okay, well, I don't talk to women, right? I just don't understand where that kind of comes from. And what I'm trying to do is, whether I'm doing it well or not, is trying to open those kind of gates and say, well, diversity and inclusion in particular is what I'm about, I suppose. I think where I work in RG, it is diverse. There's no question about that. We do mark diverse programs. We do have a diverse staff. Maybe not as diverse as other people would think, but it's the inclusion end of things. Yeah. It's the actual of, rather than somebody thinking, 10 years ago, well, Oran has gone blind, so let's leave him in a room and let him do kind of menial jobs because he'll be able to do that at his computer. I would have rather heard somebody say, that's terrible news. That's, how can we help him? What can we do? And to a certain extent, which was done. But what I think what should have been said at the same time was, we actually don't care about that because his views are as welcome as anybody else's. Or the fact that he can't see, or the fact that he might be in a wheelchair, or the fact that he might have an intellectual disability, or might have Asperger's or autism, whatever, that should go by the wayside. This is what I kind of came into. I started doing a little bit of research and found, all these companies like Microsoft and SAP were hiring, people with autistic,
with autism.
With autism, sorry. Yeah, thanks for the cue again. With autism, and it was because of their focus, their absolute focus to a particular project. And how well they gelled within a group.
Lovely.
And it was just a matter of, and actually, the interesting thing about Microsoft was actually Microsoft went to SAP because SAP started to do this originally, and these are two rival companies. And Microsoft went to SAP to say, how did you approach this? We want to do this as well. And even though they're two, they're rivals, for the common good, for the inclusion aspect, they said, how do we make this more inclusive? And I'm trying to, I think the problem with inclusion is like I was told some years ago by somebody quite high up in senior management, that diversity inclusion really meant that we don't have enough black people on television. And Jesus. we had a bit of a a robust conversation, let's say, about what I thought diversity and inclusion meant against what they thought diversity and inclusion meant. And I think it's just about what we're losing right now is the inclusion aspect of it. We do have diversity. The country is very diverse, but it's the actual, are we including people in the conversation about, are we including, I'm always kind of banging on, my thing is about audio description at the moment. Are we making sure we are catering to the visually impaired, blind audiences, and we're producing as much audio description so those viewers can take part in as many programs, can watch as many programs, excuse the pun, but blind people do use the word watch, by the way. Yeah. Or did you look at, or did you see?
You said to me the other day, I look forward to seeing you.
Yeah, there's no taboo across that, It's like I was talking to a mate of mine on Friday, and I was saying, have you seen, or I said, no, actually what I said was I started watching Breaking Bad because now it has audio description on it. And there was no fear of it. I wasn't saying to him, there was no taboo word. Oh yeah, I haven't seen that yet. I'm thinking about going back to it. Yeah. They're not taboo words. Nobody gets offended really by those kind of words. They're daily words. But I do think we need to. What I'm trying to do is just trying to get the inclusive, get people around the table more who are from the VI community. Like I talked to, one thing that really annoyed me some years ago was I was asked to give a talk in the NCBI as somebody who was working and what that was like and how I found that. And it was to a group of people who were doing a course, over a year course, independent kind of living and getting back into the workplace and getting back into the society course. And what I found was there was a kind of a lack of ambition from these people that felt that it was kind of up to the NCBI, let's say, to find them a job, or it was that they weren't going to get a job because 75% of people who are visually impaired don't work, and that's the way it is. And it is the way it is. That is as far as I know, that is still a statistic.
Yeah.
But it actually doesn't mean that you shouldn't go out and plug for, like, I was talking. There was one guy who was telling me he was working in a particular clothing store, and in menswear, and they brought him in to see if he could come back to work, and they asked him, could you go and get a pair of size 9 shoes? Could you pick out I don't know a paisley tie? Could you And he couldn't do it because he just couldn't see it. And he kind of decided at the end of the day that the company that he's working for, and he decided, well, I can't do this job anymore. And that might have been true, but actually there might have been another job that he could have done in that company. But if he had decided, well, what I'll do is I'll reinvent myself. I mean, this is really what I've had to do as well, is reinvent. I'm trying to, learn a little bit of audio stuff with my Reaper at home. I'm thinking about doing a podcast myself, maybe. But I think we all have to be as vocal and get in there and say, I have as much right to speak about X, Y, or Z as anybody else, rather than saying, well, I shouldn't have a voice because I'm blind or I have a disability. In some ways, I think it can have an advantage, because it can focus the mind and say, well, okay, there are people who will only speak for the people in the VI community. I tend to want to speak for people who are and I actually hate the word disabled. But I haven't found another word for it, a replacement for it. I hate, people would think that I have a disability. I don't think I don't have a disability. I have more abilities than I have disabilities.
Okay.
And I think that's the case for people. And again, I hate using this word, that have disabilities. There's more. Those people have more to offer. I think as much to offer. I remember reading a book about diversity and inclusion that a guy called Stephen Frost wrote, and he was head of diversity and inclusion for the Olympics in 2012 in the UK, which is the most diverse and inclusive Olympics there had ever been. And one story got to me. He was trying to be so inclusive. There was a lad. They gave everyone with a disability. They guaranteed them an interview, which is a big step to begin with. So everybody with a disability who wanted to apply for a particular job to do with the Olympics was guaranteed an interview. Not only that, they also gave them 10 or 15 minutes before the interview, they gave them a quick rundown of what they might expect at an interview. Some of these people had never been in an interview before. They also decided that they would send somebody to meet. They would go to your home if needed, collect you, bring you to the interview, give you a bit of lunch, bring you home, all that, so you didn't have to worry about the transportation or anything. And I find this the weirdest the weirdest story, because I can't understand it. There was a lad who had an intellectual disability who was going for an interview. He got the interview. He arrived with his mother on the train to London. Somebody came to meet them from the Olympics staff at the train, and they said, I don't even know if he gave the guy's name, but let's say his name was Matt. And so this person said, "Hi Matt, how are you? I'm Oran. I'm going to look after you all day today, and don't worry about anything. You're going to be fine. You're going to have a good time, and I'll bring you back on the train. I'll put you back on the train later on this evening." And he was with his mother, and that was all fine. They went into the wherever the interview was had. They had their debrief of what to expect, what questions to expect. He went into his interview. They did the interview, and they brought him around, had some lunch, back on the train. Thanks very much for coming. Hopefully you'll hear in a couple of days did you get the job or not, and went off. The next day, this guy Stephen Frost gets an email from his mother, this guy's mother, who said, "How dare you talk to my son? I'm his carer. I'm the one you talk to, not him." And Stephen Frost's response was, he's as much of a person and has as much of a right to be talked to as a human being as you do. And that's what I instructed all my staff to do. We were interviewing your son and not you. You were with your son, that's fine, but your son deserved as much respect as you did.
Yeah.
And you both got exactly the same amount of respect.
That's incredible.
The fact that you're his mum and she, that was the first time ever.
I've never had that. 'Cause I specifically talk to people, when I deal with clients, I talk to them, I don't talk to the family, like, it's them, they're here for me, or to talk about an interview or whatever. Yeah, that's incredible.
We have, my wife and I have this ongoing thing, and we haven't gone out for months because of COVID. We rarely go out, but when we go to, if we go out for a meal, and it's pretty much guaranteed to happen. We go out for a meal, and Ari's with us, and my wife will read out menu to me, and I'll pick what I want. And the waitress will come up, a waiter or waitress will come up and say to my wife, what would you like? And my wife will say, what would you like? And then she'll say, and what would he like? And my wife will say, well, he's right there and you can speak to him. His name is Oran, you can talk to him.
Jesus.
And then, okay, I'd say what I want, and food would arrive, and then we'd maybe come to dessert. If we're going to have dessert, because I always like my desserts, and menus would be had, and she'd come to my wife again and say, what would you like for dessert? My wife would say, maybe I'll have dessert or I won't have a dessert. And again, she would say, and what will he have? And she'd say, no. There was a friend, acquaintance I know, guy who had a dog. Same thing was happening to him. This happens. You'll find this all around. People are vision impaired or blind, whatever you want to call yourselves. They'll all tell you these stories. Like I've gone into a cafe where a waitress has come to me and said, "Oh, hello, your friend is over here." I said, "Okay, well, I'm not meeting anybody." "Oh, no, your friend is over here, and they'll bring me over to to a blind person, because that's my friend." But there was a guy who went into the restaurant, was having this scenario, and was being told that he couldn't bring in his dog, and he said, "No, I can't bring in my dog. It's a public place. I can bring my dog in anywhere they want." And they had to ring the manager, and that was all fine. The manager came, apologized, but the waitress, and I don't mean to be sexist, but it happened to be a waitress, and it was, and what will your friend have? And the girl that he was with said, "I don't know, Tommy, what are you going to have?" And he said, "Oh, hang on a second." And he looked at his dog and went, "Rover, what are we going to have?" And don't be like that, And it was kind of just to show us this girl, like, I am the human. I'm as human as that person beside you. There's no need to treat me any differently. So include me as well. As like Larry wants to be included now because it's dinner time. But you have to start. You have to keep thinking about, not just, oh, I'm being a good person. I hire, I think I'm diverse. I'm hiring black people. I'm hiring Chinese people. I'm hiring. It's about, you have to be inclusive about what the person's background is. It's what you're about. It's not colour related. I'm probably going to get shot down for this on your podcast, but actually I don't like this term Black Lives Matter. My motto is all lives matter. So I know, and I fully appreciate where, there is the injustice and what's been happening in the US is awful, but we all should be thinking about everybody's life.
Absolutely.
Everybody's life counts. It all matters, and we shouldn't be putting anybody, pigeonhole anybody, putting in a box, saying I won't go and converse with that person. The things you can learn from other people is amazing.
Oh, absolutely.
If you just sit down with them for a few minutes
and listen.
And just listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what I want to ask you?
You made the world and why.
I'm just very mindful of the time. We've gone over an hour. What was some of the difficulties that you have faced, if we can get through this, in COVID? What are we not seeing? What were the challenges that faced you from somebody being a blindie, as you say?
It's an interesting one, because we've had this discussion as well in the blind community, and I think immediately for me, what I can say is that Larry, I have to keep working Larry, so I have to bring him out for a walk every day, and we go out for a walk. And the very first thing I noticed about COVID was about social distancing, and people not bearing in mind anybody. Like Larry has a harness, and on his harness he has two luminous pieces of material. One of them says, "Please don't disturb me. I'm a working dog." It's not as if you can't see us coming down the road, but I've had so many incidences where I've bumped into somebody, and it's most definitely is not my fault because I can't see them. But I have found this to be the scariest aspect of COVID, is not knowing who is around you, and are those people keeping a physical distance from you. I know one of the big issues as well is going to be buses, and is buses, and whenever you get on a bus, and it's kind of when you can get on a bus and you kind of, there's that kind of immediate thing of, well, where am I going to sit? How am I going to find a seat? That's bad enough, but actually, if it goes ahead, if it keeps going on, we still have to physically distance. To be able to find a seat on your own on a bus is going to be very, very difficult. And some bus drivers are good. Some bus drivers will ask people to make way, to give the person with the blind person with a dog a seat, and that can be the first seat on the right hand side. But more often they won't. So that's a very scary kind of thought, is being around people that aren't aware of their own surroundings. So I'm utterly reliant on everybody else.
And plus you're tactile.
Very
you
tactile.
Feel your way around, so you're not touching things. Then you're leaving yourself exposed.
Yeah, really, it's that's a bit of a scary one, because I would still like, even though Larry would know the way wherever we're going, I still would use my right hand to maybe tap a wall, or just feel a wall or a door, feel for a door, feel for something, just to reassure myself that I know we are in the right place. And that in itself is just is very scary, because you don't know. There's kind of, I suppose, a bit of, oh God, I must make sure I have the hand sanitizer everywhere I go. Like one of the things in my work that we're laughing at, because it's I was actually in there at the weekend, just making sure Larry was still familiar with the place, was there are arrows on the ground. So that basically the corridors have been put in, and I think this is happening in a lot of organisations where there are 2 lanes. So you stay on the left or you stay on the right, and in our case it's stay on the left. But there is no indication of that. There's no like I've no idea. Larry doesn't know.
Visual.
It's visual. Larry doesn't know a sign. He's not going to go, oh, better stay left. But also, if there are no signs put up either. But even if there were signs, I wouldn't be able to read them. And if they were on braille, if there were braille signs, that'd be great. But if they've been touched by anybody else, then I have to be careful of that. I also have to be careful of there's also been put up automatic doors, and what you do apparently now is you used to put up a little fob up to a button. Now, so you invariably might touch that. Now you wave your hand about 2 feet away from the door. But the thing is, you have to wave your hand away at this same kind of electronic sensor to break the sensor, so that it recognizes, oh, the laser's been broken, I need to open the doors. But for me, that's no advantage, because I don't know where the sensor is to begin with.
Okay.
So you're back to this inclusiveness of, are we always thinking about am I being as inclusive as I possibly can? Did I think, when you're designing things, did I think about, or do I think, oh, I need to put in a ramp at the end when this building is done, I probably need to put in a ramp because there'll be somebody in a wheelchair, rather than thinking, what I need to do is actually, when somebody comes in this door and they're visually impaired, I need to think about tactile markings, so that somebody could walk up to a reception desk, or if they know, they're going to their office and they're going to work in this building, how can I make tactile markings or markers or whatever to help that person get from A to B? Like, one of the things really used to get me is, there were people, I would learn a route, and it'd be, I would be arcing my cane, and I'd hit, let's say, a bin. And I go, that's grand, that's the bin, I need to hit the bin, I know I'm about 15 feet away now from the door I need to go to, or the turn left or whatever. And you'd be walking along that, and then suddenly one day you'd be arcing, and you think, I think I'm going too far. And you would be going too far because the bin has been moved. And somebody would have moved the bin because they think, oh, move the bin out of your way.
Sure.
But actually I use that as a landmark. So it's just about you have to keep people, thinking about the inclusiveness. How are we catering for everybody? And I don't think we're doing that right now with COVID. I'm still kind of scared about being out, particularly like we've stopped walking we used to walk in the early evening, and the early evening when the sun was shining and people were going down to the park around my area. To me it's just a minefield. It's just a wall of noise, and there's people all around, and you lose your sense of where you are and where you're going. So we tend to go earlier in the morning, or at lunchtime or dinner time when people are away, or having their dinner or something. Well, there's going to be less people on the road, because it's just hate the idea of, because nobody it's not that people aren't well meaning. It's just that just not paying attention to, well, there is somebody who's blind, and it's our fault. A lot of it is our fault. We haven't been advocating enough, with how you should help if somebody needs some help with who are blind or they're in a wheelchair or whatever, how to help them, or what to do and what not to do. Actually, I'm speaking for the whole the blind community in Ireland. There's more we could have done during COVID. There could have been a lot more radio campaigns and TV campaigns, to kind of make aware, just be aware that just keep your eyes up. Like, still, it's nothing to do with COVID, but the one thing that still aggravates me an awful lot is people who stop in the middle of the road, and I bang into them through no fault of Larry's, because they're stopped in the middle of the road and they're playing with their phone because they're not looking up. That's one of the most fundamental things. You're on the path. You're going from A to B. Keep your eyes ahead of you.
Yeah. Oran, what's the one thing you would like people to take away after listening to this interview?
Even though this has probably been a long interview, keep listening to Matt's podcast.
I love it. He wasn't paid to say that. Well, not yet. I don't know. It's hard because there's so many. I suppose there's so many things I can rattle on for ages. I suppose, and that's probably one of the problems with this interview. You probably haven't got as much out of it as you want. But I just think awareness is the big thing. Don't be afraid. I think somebody asked me recently in work. They said there's a guy they always they seem to cross the road at the same time when they're on their way to work, and he's blind. And this guy, a colleague of mine, has said sometimes this guy he wanders off a bit to the right hand side. He doesn't quite make the path, and sometimes he stumbles over the curb. And he said he asked me the question. He said, what should I do? Because I really want to help this guy if he wants help, but if he doesn't, it's fine. And I said the biggest thing is, as far as I'm concerned, ask the person if they want help. Don't grab them. He said, I wanted to grab him, and because I could see. He said one day I saw him, he was going far too right, way right, and I just wanted to grab his elbow. They don't ever grab the person's elbow. Don't ever grab their hand. That's a no-no. That's invasion of privacy. Really, that's you're no, just don't do it. But just be aware and ask. There's no harm in asking, but don't be. My big thing is, do not be upset if you ask me, do I need help to cross the road or to get from A to B, and I say politely as I would, thanks very much for your offer, but I'm fine, we know where we're going. Don't get in a snot about that. But don't be afraid to ask. There's nobody's, there are a few people in the blind community that I would know that actually don't even like being asked, but they are very few and far between. Don't ever be afraid to ask somebody if they want help, and they don't have to be blind. If you see somebody in distress, I would say don't ever be afraid to ask somebody. That'll be what I'd be saying to people is, and be inclusive. We all have our own opinions. What did I hear in inclusion? I heard a great saying. Inclusion is not just about being invited to the party; it's about being asked up to dance as well.
Yeah, It was the one I
How's your dancing skills?
my dancing, you know, what have you got, a waltz or a? Yeah, I think diversity. I think I heard this discussed about, or at one of the TED talks years ago. Somebody said, diversity to me is what colour is your skin. Inclusion is about sitting down with a person and asking them, how's your day been?
Wow,
And from that, I think it'll spin on. You know, you'll get more from them about how their day has been, or you'll get a good conversation. You know, you'll learn a lot from somebody if you just sit down and talk with them.
Well, I'm absolutely getting so much from this. Oran O'Neill, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Thanks
I
very
really
much,
appreciate it. I absolutely loved it. You know, I loved the struggle you've had from childhood, your embracing of your blindiness, your attitude to life, and your passion for sound, and your passion for you've transformed your passion from sound into now inclusion and diversity. You know, which is powerful.
Yeah, I think it's an area that as I say, it probably wouldn't have come to the greater extent that it did if I hadn't have lost my sight. And I wouldn't say it's a crusade now, you know, that I have, but I think a lot more about the fairness and unfairness that people have, you know, throughout their lives. And I think the unfairness, there's no need. The people are spiteful people can be spiteful, or there are people who can be spiteful for no reason. And I think I'm just trying to do my bit and say, well, look, we all should be heard. I have a voice as well, and if my voice is not heard this time, that's fine, but maybe it'll be heard sometime. I mean, I've finished one story that I was really annoyed with. Happy and annoyed with it. In both instances. I play guitar, gave up guitar about 20 years ago, and found a friend of mine who's now a friend of mine. About 5 years ago, I heard of him. He was setting up a school for the blind for music tuition. It was called the Visionary School of the Arts, and it was in fighting blindness. And we've now gone from that to setting up during COVID. He went and set up a sponsorship program where we now do learning through virtual learning instruments. So we use Zoom or WhatsApp or whatever. So you can still, if you're blind, you can still. Well, you don't have to be blind actually. Any disability you feel you have, you can go to this school, which is just virtual. It's just in your home. It's on the phone. It's on your computer. But there was a guy. When I was in fighting blindness one afternoon, and his mum, he was a young fellow, he was about 14, and his mum came to me and said, will you have a word with such and such? He's having a problem. We've had a talk with him about what he wants to do for the rest of his life, and he doesn't want to do anything for the rest of his life, because he said to us the other day that 75% of the virtual vision impaired community don't work, so I'll be part of that that ratio percentage. And his mum went mad and said, no, you will bloody not. And so she said, would you have a talk with him because you're working? And I said, yeah. And so we took him aside and said, what's the story? And he said, well, I'm blind, so I can't do anything. And I said, well, what do you want to do? He said, well, I really like journalism. And I said, well, why can't you be a journalist? He said, because I can't go to, you know, my editor wouldn't be able to ring me at 3 o'clock in the morning and say there's a fire in such and such, I want you to go down and report on it. I'm not going to be able to see that. And I said, no, you're dead right, you're not, but you are actually going to be able to write about things that you know. You could write a column about being blind and how you find it, and how you find, you know, how you cope with it in your day-to-day life. You know, it's not all about reporting about criminal incidents or you know, COVID or whatever. You can tell your story. You could be a journalist doing that. And this guy, he's a young guy, and he just thought, actually I never thought about it that way.
Brilliant.
So just think about including people, and just, you know, maybe they won't have an idea, maybe they will have an idea. Give it a go.
Brilliant. Oran O'Neill, thanks very much. Guys, I absolutely loved that, Oran. That was absolutely fantastic. Thanks very much for opening my eyes and allowing me to see the stuff that I haven't been given too much attention to. As I work in the area of disabilities, brain injury, And sometimes I miss things, sometimes I'm not aware. So look, I hope you enjoyed their interview as much as I did. As always, thanks very much to Niall Riley from Rooney Media Graphics, Andy from Digital. Oh no, I forget his name. Liberty Media Hub. Liberty's Media Hub. It's like the People's Front of Judea. The Liberty's Media Hub. Shannon's Hope Line, Mental Health Warriors, Liberty's Soup Run, and you guys, thanks very much for listening and watching the show. As always, mind your little self and be compassionate, be inclusive, be diverse, be sound. Don't be an asshole.
Fair play to you, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. Take care. Bye bye.